Hi, my name is Alex Malyshenko. I'm moderating today's interview with Roman Liubyi. He filmed the movie War Now. He's taken part in DOCU Ukraine. I need to know that DOCU Ukraine movies are only available to watch for 24 hours, so you can watch it from today, 6 p.m. to tomorrow, 6 p.m. That's a 24-hour rule. It's only for DOCU Ukraine movies, as well as Claire Simon The Village series. All the rest is available until May 10th. So this is all I need to start with. Now we can start our interview, and I wanted to remind you that you can send your questions to us. Hi, Roman. Well, I wanted to know something as well. I didn't really film the movie. I created it. I put the parts together. Well, let's start from this then. I'm sure that there are some people that have already watched the movie, but I'm sure that most of the viewers haven't seen it yet. So tell us a little bit more about the movie itself. Well, what is it about? It is quite an interesting question. I'd rather the viewers tell me that. I have an answer to that, but it's my personal. My teacher, who has always taught us that you always have to ask yourself what the movie is about. That's how you build the film. However, in my personal experience, it doesn't always work like that. And everything started to puzzle together when I started asking myself what kind of a feeling, what kind of an impression I want to give my viewer. This was the centerpiece of my work. I've read that it's kind of a car crash effect. Well, that's how I call it. I put it in a way that impression of just surviving a car accident, and this is a feeling that you have just survived a huge accident. This is something that soldiers feel, and there is very few things or impressions that can be compared to that. Well, me myself in the urban environment I live in, I can only compare it to surviving a car crash, and the whole life is just different after that. I think it's quite important to realize that these people that have gone through this experience are among us, and they bear this experience with them all the time, and it changes their perspective and outlook on life. This is sort of a prism they get. How did you make the film? I know it took you about 5 years, which is quite a long time. Could you tell us a bit more about the process? Our archive got, Babylon 13 archive got a lot of different materials, which we got in different ways. We got some footage from Alexei Boldarev, and we also had some footage from Roman Liubyi. His call sign was Kino. And also Black Tulip, organization that evacuates the bodies of Ukrainian soldiers, also got us the footage from Vadim Naumovo. We also had some footage from Pastor from Donbass. All of this material really spoke to me, and I really wanted to create something out of it. And they're also very interesting because at the same time, you look at the material itself, but you keep reminding yourself where it comes from. It's not just an image or footage, that's an artifact. In the beginning, I just wanted to collect similar materials and put it together in a music video. This was the start idea. However, it came clear to me very fast that it's way more serious. But I was sure that the content, the footage that we had within a month or maybe two was quite enough for a full-length movie, but it turned out a different way for many reasons. Basically, the material, the footage that we had and used for the movie, which created the fundament for this movie, we collected it within the first year of production. The rest 4 years was mostly the process of realizing what we've seen in that material. What about the editing? There was a edited version quad for a long time here, no? Basically, the movie was ready about 2 years ago, but personally to me, as well as inside the production team, we had a few conflicts. Right now, everything is fine, but I still thought that it was really hard for me to verbalize the problem. And it was quite difficult for me because not being able to explain the issue turns it into a big problem. And right now, I'm quite sure that what you can see now, the movie as it is right now, is what was worth making. Basically, the difference between these two editing versions is that in fine details, but I think that these details play a big role for the movie, and that's pretty much it. One of the soldiers have offered you his material, but you already had it. Well, that's how it started, basically. We started with Alexei Baldarev's footage, and I made a trailer, which is now the beginning of the movie itself. The editing was unchanged. We released it online and asked soldiers to provide some footage if they had any, or anyone who could have any material. I left my phone number on the post, and we didn't have much reaction. We probably had like 3 people sending us a video each. And one of the people that reached out was Alexei Baldarev. And we initially talked for maybe just a minute. It was just, hello, I've just seen this post. I have some footage. And he started telling me the details of the material, and I just told him that I have already got it. And that was pretty much it. He was like, well, okay. And he just hung up on me. And just in 6 months or so, he unfortunately died in infantry. And I think it was very significant. And his desire to share this experience and his footage was very important, as he was probably the only person who was that eager to do that. It is a quite weird situation to me. It is quite confusing. You just need to watch the movie to understand it. It's really hard to explain. I know that this trailer, I watched it as I was getting ready for the interview. I think it's still available on the official Warnote website. It is there from 2015. Why did you keep that version of the trailer if you have the newer versions? And as I understand, Warnote is a bigger project than just a movie, right? Could you tell us a bit more about that? Well, for some reason, we did not have, well, I believe I'm pretty good at making trailers, and I think it's kind of easy for me, but I didn't really have a desire to collect any new materials in 5 years that came later. And the makeshift promo campaign that we did was just little pieces of footage, and that was it. We didn't make any other trailers. The project War Note, I really hope that the film is just the start of this project, not the end of it. We want to keep collecting similar material, and I'm not quite sure yet whether it's going to be another film or it's going to be a docu-series or it's going to be something interactive, because there's a lot of unique and absolutely fascinating material. We already have enough footage to make at least 2 full feature films. I'm not even talking about what can you see just comparing the frontline videos and home videos of the same people. This whole story is really, it's really important to put together this material, at least because it has historical importance, but if we don't put it together, it's just gonna stay on some flash drives that veterans have. It has already happened before, and I had calls from some soldiers' relatives who would say that they have lost. They called us to tell that they had some footage that we have lost before, and it was really good to know that the footage has been preserved and we could use it. And it's sort of a feedback that we're getting. We have a question from the viewers. It's about editing. Why did you choose this kind of art house editing style? We had 2 ways to move with this material. Either do full documentary video, here you go, here's a piece of reality, and we could just leave it like that, not to give any color correction, not to change anything. That was one way. And the other way, we could give some changes, and this way we would have to work really good and give the maximum work we could give in a way to express it the best way. I've seen some reactions to the trailer. Those were people that are quite far from the issue of war, that kind of live in a parallel reality, and those war-related issues don't really touch on them, and the trailer touched them a lot. They were quite impacted. I'm not sure if I should use this word, but I believe the word entertain and still fits in the framework here. I wanted to keep this these effects, and I didn't want it to keep it as a subculture movie and keep it for the audience of just the authors or someone who was directly connected to the situation. But I wanted to give it to the more broad audience of the people who are not directly connected to these issues, because it can be interesting to many people. It is also a question of design of art house editing. I wanted to use a mistake as a tool in different sense of this world. There are a few mistakes in the edit in itself. just minor mistakes. There's something wrong on the footage stage, there's something wrong with the editing, then there's something wrong on expert stage. There's a lot of mistakes in the movie itself, just because this footage itself is not perfect. So that's my explaining of the choice of the editing style.
Now I have another question. Someone is saying, thank you very much for a brilliant film. Thank you for not having talking heads, for providing authentic material. And could you please elaborate on the way you worked with the sound? I went through a fantastic amount of work on making the sound come across. I worked with it a lot as well, and over the 5 years, I've listened to it so much that I have it recorded in my head now. But when well, we didn't want to turn this into a, how do I put it, a monotonous sound and image. Color correction. I'm sorry. I'm incredibly sorry for following this very winding road. The problem is that the difference in material, both in terms of sound and in terms of color, we didn't want to try and amalgamate and mix the content. We wanted it to remain different. So after all of the magic that happens at the equalizer, which I cannot elaborate on, I'm not a specialist on that. After that, in my headphones, the film started sounding somewhere in a different place in my head. I can physically explain it. Somehow the film began sounding in a different resonator. I don't know, closer to my forehead. And previously, it used to be located in the headphones, and now it's somehow migrated into the head. I would highly recommend watching this film wearing headphones, similarly to many other films. Yeah. Can you continue talking about the sound? Well, this is what I can say. Have I got anything else to add? Oh, come on. Let me put this like this. Did you have specific references when you were formulating the task? When you were approaching the sound, was there anything else you based your work on apart from the concept of the mistake? Wow. I don't know. I really cannot recall any specific references. I'm not sure. Perhaps, we synchronized each other. So we synchronized so much with Andrei that there was no need to explain things. Continuing the conversation about sound, we had 2 pieces of music used in the film. They weren't there for 4.5 years into the project. They weren't there, and we didn't plan to have music in the film originally. And then accidentally, there's this radio called MTS. It's an internet radio. They have DJs, from London, New York, whatever. And then suddenly I heard this song, a very interesting song. And and it turns out it has lyrics in Ukrainian. The singer is female, and I started looking it up, and so for the first time, I had the idea that a piece of music would have been nice in our film. It came across as so mystical to me. It sounded like a bad fairy tale, a fairy tale that is alluring, but you realize you shouldn't be getting into it. This was the song by Svetlana Nenyo, and then I spent a lot of time to try and get in touch with this person. It turned out to be... She turned out to be quite a mystical figure in the Ukrainian underground. Yeah, and then She's 15 by Linia Mannerheim, the Mannerheim line, which plays during the final as the final credits roll. Well, that I don't know. I just feel this is the coolest piece of Ukrainian music I have ever heard, period. It's at the same time both happy and sad, and it's got so much life to it. I felt it was so full of life, similarly to our film, which is why it resonated. Right, we've got another question. Just how related do you feel to the topic of war? Well, I mean, I feel, I would say, I believe in a way, mm, this kind of activity is, activism. So I am an activist. I'm an advocate. People don't really like engaging with the topic of war, which is why we should be doing it. The next film we're going to work on is also going to be focused on the war, on the downed MH17 flight. And, to be frank with you, I would like to work with cartoons, and I'm so involved in shooting cartoons together with my daughter now during the quarantine. That's what we do at home. But it's kind of a position on the one hand. There's probably more to it. So what you're saying is that this is a need. This is not about you being related to the topic and into this topic. This is more of a civil position. Well, to be honest with you, I'm not a fantastic citizen. I don't really follow the news. I'm not staying up to date. And so, in a way, this film is, this is what I can do, I feel. This is my contribution. Well, I don't really follow the news very closely, and I'm not following the history of the war. I'm into other things. I would like to elaborate on this because there's the question: what can you say? What new can you bring to the discussion after more than 7 years? And at the same time, to what extent do we really need this? Because many people say they are tired of the war, or their position is that they were used to be involved into the action very much, and then they distance themselves from what's happening. So my question is, do you feel this film is on the agenda, and what else can we say? I really don't understand people who say, oh, there's another film about the war. What do you mean? I honestly cannot understand what they are talking about. It's as if we have resolved the issue. The issue is not just unresolved. It's so far from being resolved. Of course, we're hoping it will come to a conclusion, but the resolution is not out there somewhere on the horizon. So we should continue the conversation. We should continue articulating the issue. I mean, no one seems to be saying, oh, damn it, another film about the Second World War. And I feel we're never going to come to that point. The only issue is how we do this. The question is which methods we use to keep the conversation going. And I feel that War Note is quite fresh in this context, and it has something to draw the viewer's attention. It was a fresh work for me as well, and I'm going to come back to this. We've got another question from the viewers. Were you thinking about working on similar projects, perhaps a single story made of different fragments? Yes, so this touches upon War Note, and generally I just feel this is something close to me. The idea of a film collage. I like the idea of the collage as a genre. And so basically, the next project we're going to work with, it's called Iron Butterflies. It also allows space for this style to be developed. So I am relying on the experience of working with different footage and, using the views of different people on the same event, and this view is represented by what the person picks out. this is also interesting. We all know what it means to shoot something on a smartphone, on a telephone. Right. So you look at someone's footage and you say, wow, this person has picked out things that I never think about. And it's very easy to imagine yourself in the shoes of the person shooting the film. I feel I've answered two questions. Right. So you're saying that Iron Butterflies is a similar project, but not entirely similar, right? Because this was a film from the point of view of military personnel, and Iron Butterflies are going to be is going to be about MH17 downed by the Russian Buk missiles. It was from the Netherlands. Yeah, but yeah, it was Malaysian Airlines, but it carried mostly people from the Netherlands. Right, so that is your next upcoming project. And you also mentioned that Warnote would have a continuation, a follow-up. Well, we're not entirely sure. We're going to see, of course. You know, this online premiere is also a reason to address those who might have similar footage available. We are still looking for it. We are still collecting it, and we want to continue doing that because we feel this is an important page in history that shouldn't get lost, and which actually can get lost very easily. Right, and following up on that, we have another question. It's highly likely that you haven't used all of the footage that was available to you. So could you please elaborate on the principles you used to select your material? When we just started the project, I was very meticulous about selecting the material and looking through it. I'm not sure how futile this activity was. I spent time transcribing each shot, not to lose any materials. I would make a screenshot and then I would print them on sheets of paper. I had a huge wall in my office all covered in these sheets of paper. And then the amount of the material grew, and it became obvious that there's no point in being so meticulous, looking frame by frame, right? And you know, it has this quality when you open the file, it just jumps out at you. It either impacts you or leaves no trace at all. That's the main principle I used to select the material. I looked for bright, striking, surrealistic images, but I wouldn't say that was, you know, the guiding principle and the key criterion, because these surrealist images of again, we have those worth of 2 or 3 movies. Another important thing I considered, you know, there's an important piece of footage, a famous piece of footage we have. What's the location? I remember from Karlivka. The Donbass Battalion provided it to us. This is it is a famous piece of video, one of the first clashes in the war. And, you know, I reviewed it so many times because it is so striking, so vivid. I mean, wow, this is Counter-Strike in real life. They are, I mean, they are, there's this white minibus that moves wounded people. They hand them over to each other. It's action, it's crazy. So much happening. But it seemed to lack something. I was trying to understand what it lacks. It lacks this feeling of brotherhood. And I realized that this was an incredibly important criterion for selecting the material. You feel this relationship between the people, and that is incredibly important. This whole spirit of brotherhood is fundamental. It cannot be compared to anything, and it cannot be paralleled to anything. There seems to be some sort of ecological, how do I say this? Damn it. Do they have an ecosystem? Yes, I would say they have an ecosystem in their social group, in their unit. They have a relationship going on, and that is also a driving point. Perhaps the film is about that.
Can you tell us maybe the percentage or maybe the hours of the material in general, how much you got of the footage and how much of it was used in the movie? Well, I counted that before, but I don't think I will be able to give you any exact number. Well, there's a lot of stuff like, let's say if anyone asked me whether I wanted to, there's a lot of traumatizing material in the movie, but there's a lot more traumatizing material that we left out. We really didn't want to hurt anyone. We had a lot of material for that, to be honest. Well, let's keep it like that. And we had this question about art house editing, and it reminded me of your relationship with film industry in general. And I think Warnout is quite experimental, and Iron Butterfly seems to be even more experimental. But I remember that you have applied to National Film Agency with your own short movie project, and it was rejected as way too experimental. Oh, well, that's very interesting. It's in relation to the topic of how interested I am in the topic of war in general. That was a movie from, I don't even know. It was absolutely experimental. I really want to shoot it. My wife advised me to try and shoot a short film, looking at the reference of Octavian Past. And this filmmaker has a story somewhere on the merge of poetry and prose, and it's absolutely possible to film it, but it has a lot of puns, it has a lot of images that are really hard to visualize, but it tells a story of romantic relationship between the narrator and the second subject. Maybe it's a sea wave, maybe it's a woman, and it's really not clear, but I wanted to show this relationship between a man and a sea wave, a literal wave in the water that he kept in a jar, and apparently the National Agency Commission saw it as a way too experimental. But it's very subjective, as everyone has their own vision, and maybe I'm not able to see someone else's vision. What is going on inside my own head was quite, it doesn't look that experimental to me. Well, maybe we'll get back to that question when you actually make that movie. Can you speak a little bit about some absurd that you have talked about, and you've talked about surreal stories at war. Why do you find this so important? I think that these moments where you feel whatever you look at, dependent on the point of view that you take, it can look surreal. It's hard to explain. These are the moments when you look at something and you kind of wake up. It sort of disturbs your mind, and it keeps the viewer It keeps the viewer with the subject of the movie. It keeps them vigilant. The question is, I haven't seen the movie yet. What else do I need to know about watching it, except for watching it in headphones? I don't think it's that important. You can watch it at any time of the day. What else? There is a lot of jokes in the film. There's a lot of humor. And this marginal frontline humor, which is very primitive, you need to be ready for it to be very primitive, because if you're not ready for that, it's going to be hard to watch it. This humor is quite specific. It takes quite a different note. Just keep in mind that this humor that they use at the front line is kind of a safe place for them. What else can be said about the war? And I wanted to get back to that question. I think that it's sort of a war routine that you're showing, and this humor that you're showing is something new that I haven't seen in many movies made about war. It may have been present in other wars, but you were putting an accent on it. And for example, there's a scene where there's sort of a slow shooting going on, and the heroes are talking about that, just, joking about bullets almost reaching them. The question is, why do you put such a focus on humor? Well, it's just something that really, you just notice it because it's really hard to understand how these people can joke so much. And because they do it, it really makes you get attached to them, because they're absolute superheroes. You don't know how they can do it in those conditions. And it's really funny, to me personally at least. It's really interesting how people can adapt and use humor in these situations. Well, humor is a sign of intellect. It's really hard to be stupid, and you just need to know how to joke. And apparently they just all have a really good sense of humor, and it was really important to me to underline that. And if you feel that there was a focus on it, it means that I've done something right. Don't you think that it could have been better if you did not underline that? Well, honestly, no. I have another question regarding this movie being an archive film. Most of the films are made by someone who went to the war zone on purpose, by themselves or with several people, but they were going there with an intention to make a movie. With you, it's completely different. It's more of a accidental situation here. You could have not have that footage. So what is the difference between working with a movie as an intentional project and with a movie as an archive project? Well, there is a few issues and few questions with working with this material. I think that working with this material gives you a few psychological advantages. I'm not really good at the shooting site, and I'm really concerned about this. There's this joke about there's this joke about documentary movies that you just tell about the best scenes that you could take, but you didn't take them. And here, the best part is that you already have all the footage that could have been already taken, and you just work with the existing content. Also, well, we did not ask anyone to make that footage on purpose. Do you think it's time to archive all this footage already, or do we have to keep shooting these, or do we have to go to the stage of understanding and analyzing this footage that we have? Well, you know, the first movies about war, they weren't to analyze the situation. They were just depicting the situation as it is. And it was just, the first movies were more of a, you know, descriptive projects. With you, it is different because there is more realization of the situation. You're given more perspective to that as a material that have been found post event itself. Well, it's kind of hard to give any kind of clear answer to this one, but really it's quite a tough question. I don't know. I do not really know how to approach this, to be honest. All right, let's take an easier question. Talking about the sorting issue again, how did you sort out the material and how did you put it into the order? Well, as I wanted to reach the audience that is not really connected to the issue of war at all, and I wanted to make it comprehensive and understandable for the international audience, I really wanted to kind of lead the viewer and take them on a certain path that leads to this movie itself. First of all, we had the trailer edited and put together. Then we had the sequence of road, and it actually kept a editing version until today, I think. And then I'm not sure if I can give any spoilers here, but the video itself, in the moments of the most danger to the life of those who were filming, there's always a cut. We always artificially cut the video in the moment of the biggest danger. But it is always cut in the moment where they could really be ended in real life. The composition is quite complex, and I can talk for a long time about this whole structure. For example, the juxtaposition of events that are opposite in life, let's say, which is we put together fire and water in the movie, and it is really hard for me to put it onto different shelves. Maybe if I open it in the editing software, I will be able to explain something. But is that what you mean? The sort of cut at the danger moment? It's kind of a cliffhanger, and then you're given the suspense and you're expecting what is going to be next. Well, yes, I think it was my intention. I wanted to show what is going on, what happens when you're almost in this point of danger. I wanted to show what happens to your brain when you're constantly being in this suspense and this dangerous situation, because there's a lot of people that live in urban environment, they don't really have this instinct of saving themselves. You know, we just don't need it. And I really wanted to put the viewer in this kind of like state of suspense, a state of danger. I don't know how really that works.
Why was it so important for you to have this experience of suspense? Because this is the condition that these people spend their days in, and this is the experience that they later import into their everyday lives. You know, they are now back to their families, and if you're going on the underground, it's highly likely that there is at least one person in the carriage with you whose brain is fully in self-preservation mode, and they are occupied with this. This is their reality, and we're not devoting enough attention to that. Thankfully, these people are being worked with, but I feel that the efforts on the part of the society are just not sufficient to help them adapt. You know, I'm jumping from one topic to the other. I'm just keeping track. If you're still okay, yeah, if I get carried away, just stop me. So the goal of this film was to try and reduce the distance between people with combat experience and, you know, regular people, us, me and you. Damn, that thought seems to have run away from me. Right. So finally, I have to ask you: did the military personnel see your film? Did your contributors, the people who shot the material, did they see the final film, and what was their reaction? Right. So there is a big friend of ours, a brother of our project, Valery Puzik, and he shot part of the footage, and he was incredibly supportive of our work of creating the film. And together with Maxim Krivtsov, they looked at the rough cut, the rough edit, and they told us, wow, mate, this was amazing. I mean, this is what we needed. So I was, you know, I was quite sure that this film would not appeal to military personnel. Oh, we had another thing. Yevgen Shevchenko, the person who shot the exchange of prisoners, I met with him and I showed him the trailer. And for him, the trailer was, you know, it seemed to have clicked with him, and he was very much impressed. And I went in like, you know, look at this. I've got 10 minutes of the first sequence, the road to the front line. And I remember he's looking at it, and he goes like, you know, and it's entirely out of context, and it did not seem to really appeal to a soldier, because he's like, what's happening? Where are we going? What is this about? And again, I'm getting lost again. Come on, keep it together, mate. Keep it together, mate. Not long to go now. Yeah, right. Right. So you were saying that he was looking at the road material, and what did he say? Was it not interesting for him? Yes. He said he was not impressed, and from that moment, I started thinking that this material would not appeal to soldiers. It would be targeted at, you know, regular people to get them acquainted with the world out there, the world at the front line. And you mentioned Valery Puzik before that he and his friend looked at the rough cut. Yes, and they got very much engaged. Right, so you've told us that you've showed your footage to 3 soldiers. Did you have anyone else? Well, yes, right now at this point we've had many more people watching it, and I'm going to talk to the people who contributed their footage after they watch it. But we've had 2 people essentially who saw the final cut, and they liked it, they enjoyed it, and it seemed to also produce a therapeutic effect, which is incredibly important. Right. So when you're talking about the film, it is a strongly bodily experience. Whether you want it or not, you seem to find yourself in the shoes of the person shooting, even if you're watching it on a small screen. So my question is, how important was it for you not to just reduce the distance, but to have the viewer in the shoes of the person shooting? Well, did you feel immersed? Well, I mean, it's willy-nilly. It just happens. You have these bodily sensations that you might identify as you're watching the film. And when you're seeing this this picture, point of view picture, you kind of find yourself in the situation. Even despite these gaps that we see because of the way the film is edited, you're still in the moment. Well, if that's your feedback, if you're saying that we managed to immerse you into the situation, that's fantastic. That's the way this was supposed to work out. This is brilliant because, well, obviously we arranged the material to achieve a certain goal, but, immersion is the ultimate goal of film. If the viewer ended up immersed, that's great. This is shot, of course, as a POV, so obviously it would have been very sad if the viewer did not get immersed and did not have these people's perspective. That would have been weird. Right. We still have time, and I have one more question from me personally. Perhaps I should have brought this up at the very beginning of the conversation. Why is the film called War Note, and why doesn't it have a name in Ukrainian? Wow. I love answering that question. So the name came up just when I saw the first pieces of footage, from the first three people. I just needed to come up with a name for the folder when I would where I would store the footage, and I named it War Note. And since then, we have never been able to come up with a better equivalent. And this is probably going to be a request, a kind request to the viewers. If you have any idea about how we could translate it into Ukrainian, well, why not call it the Ukrainian equivalent of War Note? I think there's a phrase like that in Ukrainian for a military document. No, I just feel it's so out of place. It either sounds silly or it just, the message is lost. This is not a log, it's a note. It's not a sketch, it's not anything, right? So it's complicated. Well, I won't be offering you any more options. No, honestly, I feel I'm quite open to considering suggestions. So yeah, if anyone has ideas about the Ukrainian equivalent for War Note, I would be happy to have it. You mentioned that you were also trying to make sure that your film comes across to the international audience. How did this work out, and will the film be screened anywhere outside Ukraine, or is it a secret? Are you not allowed to talk about that? Well, we don't have a specific plan for international screenings. Yeah, and for reaching the international audience, we don't have a specific plan of traveling across the festival circuit. We're not there yet, but we've had several people. I mean, not Ukrainians, people who are completely beyond this context. They are not aware of what's happening. They still seem to feel something. They still seem to understand. So we do have potential in that respect, and this film can be viewed abroad. I was trying to stay away from, say, clear references to cities, villages, and locations. It does not come across to me personally. And of course, you can imagine what kind of a reaction it would produce with a foreigner. We simply have one additional subtitle, which includes everything that you need to know to understand it. It says that this film is shot by Ukrainian military personnel and volunteers. So it states that It represents one side of the conflict, and it specifies which side it is. And that's it. That's basically all the context you need to know. And for example, we do have the song on the vinyl recording that is played by our soldiers, and if you hear it, it does not come across as a local conflict. You start thinking like, wow, they're listening to Black Sabbath. Wow, so that's the second song that we've identified. No, I mean the Black Sabbath song is a separate thing. It is not soundtrack per se. It it is part of the footage. It is played in the footage. The soldiers just found the records and decided to play the songs. So this is also an anchor, perhaps, will allow the foreign viewer to identify themselves with the soldiers wherever you are. Wherever your home is, it will be easier for you to relate with this material. You mentioned that you were going to work on archiving the material and the footage. Did you somehow classify it when you said you classified it when you were returning it to the authors? Are you considering establishing a digital archive, so moving from a film to maybe a museum or something similar to that? I honestly feel we shouldn't do that. It isn't worth it. I mean, this material needs to be reprocessed by someone, reframed. It is not something that you should just dump on your viewer. For many reasons, you shouldn't be doing that. What reasons? What do you mean? Well, I mean, there are things that are deeply disturbing, that can traumatize much stronger than the stuff we already have in the film. Some people, some of the people who provided their footage, they we mention, so they say they're call signs in the credits. They did not want to be entirely identified. So for multiple reasons, there's stuff there that just cannot be dumped out and published. And I mean, to be honest, this might be interesting for people who are really into the topic of the war, who are following the developments. I feel it won't appeal to the larger audience, to people who are not entirely within the context. It needs to be reconstructed. It needs to have these highlights placed in it. I mean, because this format that I'm talking about, this would be an invitation to look at the material, even to watch the film. Here at DocuDays, the person is supposed to want to see it. Well, I mean, that's a fundamental prerequisite of viewing. Well, you're saying that someone might not be interested in the material. Of course they have to be interested. Well, I think the film as it is made right now, when it is reconstructed and when it has a clear story, it appeals to a larger audience. I'm not sure even I personally would be interested in viewing an archive of footage shot by different soldiers. I'm not sure why I would do that. Whereas here, we sort of have a message, we have highlights, we have this story going somewhere. Right, I'm going to have my final question for you, and you'll have the chance to rest. You have the rewind effect being used in the film to transfer between. Is it used to transfer between frames, or is it a highlight in itself? Well, we had very different kinds of errors in the footage. Some of these errors, some of these artifacts, they are not artificially created. So no one, except for me probably, will be able to tell where the glitches and the errors come from the original footage and where we introduced it artificially, where it happened at the stage of footage, where it happened at the stage of export. And it also serves to deliver the energy of this material. It has these errors, which we decided to keep consciously, even though they are not like pre-planned or whatever. They serve multiple functions, to be honest, not just in themselves. They can also serve to reinforce. They can be compositionally placed in order to reinforce certain other aspects, if that makes sense for you. I mean, it does make sense for me. I hope it makes sense for more than just me. Right, I think at that point, I'm going to say thank you. I seem to have... Damn it, I had another idea. Maybe I can recall what I wanted to mention. No, it isn't coming back. It isn't coming to me. Right. Thank you very much, I have to say. So I would like to remind all of our viewers that Roman's film will be available at DOCU Space until 1800 tomorrow. Tomorrow we're having another tête-à-tête with two directors, with Lyubomir Stefanov and Tamara Kotevska. It will be moderated by Sergei Saverov. These are the authors of Honeyland, and it's a documentary hit from last year, which toured the festival circuit. It was nominated for the Academy Award as the Best International Film and the Best Documentary Film. Unfortunately, staying at the nomination stage, and I am not sure if it's available at DocuSpace right now, because it has already reached its viewing limit. But for those who have had the opportunity to view it, feel free to join us tomorrow. Don't forget that the festival is free of charge, but you can still donate and support it. This will be your contribution into the future of DocuDays when it goes back into the physical reality. At that, we thank you very much for your attention. Bye-bye.